Okay, Minister, the very simple fact about the situation for the vast majority of people on middle and low incomes, working people or people dependent on pensions or social welfare, is that they are going to be worse off next year than they were this year. That's the fundamental fact. And as much as the government may try and bedazzle people with a long list of measures that they have taken to try and mitigate the absolutely diabolical cost of living and housing crisis that people are facing, that is the fact. Inflation, official rate, running at 8.1%, but of course, as every single body that looks at these matters has made clear, the ESRI and everybody else, the inflation rate for people on lower incomes is actually higher. It's the highest for those who have the least, because they depend most or use most of their income to spend on the things that have seen shocking increases in cost and price, whether it's food, whether it's energy, or whether it's housing. So the people who have least are suffering the most, and the vast, vast majority of people will be poorer next year than they were this year. And meanwhile, there's another group of people for whom it's going to be much, much better next year. Much, much better. And it was better this year than it was last year, and it was better last year than the year before. That's the truth. That's the truth that's never mentioned in these debates. And a few facts in that regard are worth putting on the record. Energy poverty in this country is at an all-time high of 29% of the population. I mean, it's shocking to think. Just under a third of the population are suffering from energy poverty. It is estimated if current trends of energy cost increases continue, that figure is going to go up to 43%, and that is almost double its previous recorded high of 23% in 1994-1995. So soon, if this trend continues, just under half of the population will be suffering energy poverty. More generally, according to Social Justice Ireland, 19% of the population, when you take into account housing costs, are living in poverty. Or on the poverty line, 935,000 people, including 300,000 children. Almost 1 in 5 of the population living on or below the poverty line when you take into account energy costs and housing costs. But then for others, it's a very, very different story. The median pay package of top CEOs last year rose by 42% to an average of €2 million each in pay. Oxfam say in a report they produced earlier this year that the wealth of Ireland's 9 richest billionaires increased in just 1 year by 15 billion. That's not how much they have, that's how much their wealth increased in 1 year, bringing their total wealth of 9 individuals to €51 billion. I mean, you can't even imagine it, how rich these people are. A report on the pay of directors for Irish companies shows that many of them recorded maximum bonus payments in 2021. So while everybody else is getting poorer, hammered with the cost of living and housing crisis, the directors of companies are most of them receiving massive bonus payments. The average non-executive director, which is basically a part-time job, right, a non-executive director of a company, was paid on average last year for a part-time job of sitting at a few board meetings, €107,000. The average for executive directors was close to €1 million for sitting on a company board. And of course, you look at these companies and how well they were doing while other people were being crushed. Electric Ireland made an additional 63 million in 2021, with profits reaching 679 million. Yet, in March of this year, it announced price increases of nearly 25%, and then further increases in August by 11% for electricity and 32% for gas, affecting 1.2 million households. Bord Gáis operating profits grew 74% in the first half of 2022 to 39.4 million, when they were only the previous year 19 million. Bord Gáis increased its prices twice in September 2021. Its domestic customers now pay an average of €706 more for electricity and €573 more for gas than last year. Overall, estimates suggest that most households will be down over the last year and next year they will have lost in real terms, because of the rise of cost of living, housing costs, inflation and so on, somewhere between €4,000 and €6,000. Pay cuts, savage pay cuts and income cuts in real terms. Now, and actually, I think it should be just briefly worth mentioning the wealth figures as well. The richest 5% of people in this country amount to 93,000 households. Between them, that group have €388 billion. €388 billion. It may be of interest to the public out there that net household wealth in this country has now reached over €1 trillion. For the first time. We are the fourth richest country in the world. But there's a problem with the distribution of this wealth. According to the task, and the only study the government did on it in recent years in 2017, the richest 10% of our population own 53% of the wealth, but the least well-off 50% of the population have 1.4% of the wealth. 1.4. So, the average wealth of the richest 93,000 households in this country is €4 million each. Whereas we have 1/5 of the population living in poverty, and that situation is getting worse. Now, against that background, what did the government do in the budget to address that situation? 5% for pensioners and social welfare recipients, €12. €12. According to Social Justice Ireland, the necessary level of income per week in order to be sure you will not suffer poverty is €286. But the pension went from €253 to €265. €21 short of the poverty line. That's the reality. Don't forget while you're thinking about that, about the 93,000 richest households who have £4 million each in wealth, never mind income. The vast majority of our pensioners, anybody dependent on the state pension, is living, in effect, in poverty or very, very close to it. But a 5% increase, when inflation officially running at 8%, but in actuality about 9% or more for those low-income households who depend most of their income or spend most of their income on food and heating and so on. No change to the basic rate of fuel allowance, no change to the basic rate of the living alone allowance, no change to the domiciliary care allowance basic rate, no change to the carers support grant, no change to the back to school school clothing and footwear allowance, no change to child benefit on the basic rates. Now, because a lot of people got out on the cost of living coalition protests in advance of the budget, and there's no doubt, because you were changing the figures even over that weekend, because we managed to get 20,000 people out on the streets, you were put under pressure and we got some one-off payments. And sure, everybody will be glad of those payments. But those payments are going to disappear into the profits and pockets of the CEOs I mentioned, the executive board directors that I mentioned, and the profits of the companies that I mentioned. That's where all that money is heading, into their pockets. And it will be gone come the new year, and then the reality kicks in. Yeah, by the end of the winter months, Minister, by the end of the winter months, and then the reality kicks in that in terms of your actual basic income, you got less than the rate of inflation and the rises in cost of living. You're poorer next year than you were last year. That's the reality once those one-off payments have disappeared. None of this is necessary if there was a willingness to actually put some small increased tax burden on those companies and those extraordinarily wealthy households that have got more extraordinarily wealthy in the last year and more extraordinarily profitable in the last year or two, and redirect that towards ensuring that nobody in this country lives in poverty and everybody can afford a roof over their head and have heating and food prices that are affordable. So that is the big picture as far as I'm concerned, Minister, and a few sticking plasters will not deal with the gaping wound of deprivation, of poverty, of housing misery and of energy poverty that huge numbers of people are suffering. Beyond those general points, I want to make a few specific points. If you're over 16, you may be entitled to a disability payment. But, as I discovered, that means you're still at school, you can get a disability payment, but if your mother then applies for the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance for you to go back to school, you don't get that allowance. You are refused the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Because the child between 16 and 18 is getting a disability payment. Now, just so you know, the mother's not allowed to take the disability payment off her child. The child gets the disability payment because they have a disability and they're entitled to it, and that is their income. So the idea that the mother doesn't get money for the back-to-school costs because the child is on a disability payment is frankly obscene. That needs to be addressed immediately. Immediately. It is absolutely shocking. It's actually a form of discrimination against people with disability, in reality. Another woman came into my clinic, her husband in fact, she's not very unwell, is 10 years on illness benefit. Now in 2009 it was changed, the rules around illness benefit were changed so that you could only be on it for 2 years. But prior to that there were long-term recipients of illness benefit. When that change came in, people were given the option to stay on illness benefit if they thought that was the best payment for them. So this woman did. But as a result, she is not entitled, even though she's on that payment for 10 years, she has been denied all those years the fuel allowance. She is also denied the one-off payment of the €400 cost of living payment. And I have PQ answers back to that effect. And in case the official is passing a note saying she can apply for other allowances, she did, and she's been denied them both. She's been denied them both. If she's entitled to illness benefit, she should be entitled to the fuel allowance, and she should have been getting it for the last 9 years, and she should have got the cost of living payment. You should do something about that, Minister. Beyond that, I see absolutely no justification why people on illness benefit, job seekers benefit, maternity benefit, death benefit, injury benefit, carers benefit should not have the fuel allowance anyway. Why should they not have it? I mean, honestly, why should they not have it? There's no good reason. They're going to suffer the cold this winter as well. They're suffering the increase in the bills just because on their what's called a short-term payment, based on their PSRI contributions, they are refused the fuel allowance. That is outrageous in my opinion. Absolutely outrageous. The fuel allowance should be extended to them. I heard Deputy Devlin say that it's a good thing that the income thresholds for fuel allowance for those on pensions and over 70 or those under 70 on a state pension have been increased. And it is a positive thing. I accept that. But it is also, I got an official PQ answer from you, Minister, that you do not intend to advertise that fact in January. There's going to be no public information campaign. I got that in a PQ. Right? So I suggest you do have a public information campaign and that it is broadcast very, very loud and clear to people in January that they are entitled now, that they should check whether the new thresholds and new means thresholds will entitle them to. And that will be broadcast from the rooftops, in the radio and the television, that people are entitled to that. The autumn bonus double payment, as I mentioned, included for some benefits, but not for illness benefit. Why not? I don't see why it shouldn't be. People are ill, off work, as a result of illness. Just because it's short term doesn't mean they are any less affected by the cost of living crisis that people are suffering, the winter costs, and so on. And I'm assuming, unless you're going to tell me something else, that all of those people who don't get that double payment will also presumably not get the double payment at Christmas, or will they? They should get the double payment at Christmas because they need it just as much as everybody else. So those are my points, Minister. The specific points I hope you will address. They are anomalies is a nice word. They're injustices. As far as I'm concerned, but on the wider issue, the government has to do a lot more. I mean, just to take one other area, actually I have 2 minutes left, so I might as well say it. Where could we pay for all this, right? How could we pay for all this? Well, one area is employers' PRSI. If, for example, as we suggested in our budget, we got it costed by the Department of by your department, we established a new PRSI rate of 19.75% to be paid by employers for employees that they are employing who are being paid more than €90,000 a year. Right, so it's a relatively small cohort, but they have an increased level of employer PRSI contribution. That would raise €866 million in 1 year. We have some of the lowest employers' PRSI rates anywhere in Europe. If we slightly increased the 11.5% rate to 13.05, we would raise €1.5 billion, again costed by your department. Relatively small increase for that lower rate of employers' PRSI and a higher rate of employers' PRSI for the very highest earners. We could raise €2.3 billion. €2.3 billion. That would start to go a long way to redistributing some of the wealth in this country to alleviate poverty, alleviate energy poverty. And one last point, if I could just make it in 26 seconds. We've had study, as you know, Minister, which suggests that for those with disability, the average additional costs can be between €9,000 and €12,000 a year. Where is the disability premium for people with disabilities in the social welfare bill? On an ongoing basis, to give them a premium to compensate for the 9,000 to 12,000 euro additional cost that people with disability. We should do that.